The noonday sun hammered the street of Tucson flat and white. Chief Grey Wolf held the rope, the other end tight around a woman's wrists. She was wrapped in a rough wool blanket, nothing showing but her bare feet in the dust. Behind him, 20 Apache warriors sat motionless on painted horses. The chief looked at the silent townsmen and said, "You choose a man to marry this woman by sundown, or my warriors burn this town to the ground." Not one man on that boardwalk moved. That was the moment the stranger had not yet arrived. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? To understand what led to this, we have to go back to the day before any of this began. The sun was barely up when the dust cloud appeared on the east road. It moved fast, a dozen horses, maybe more. The old shopkeeper sweeping his porch stopped cold. He squinted. Apaches. He dropped his broom and ran for the sheriff's door. By the time the sheriff stepped outside, the riders were already in the middle of Main Street. Chief Grey Wolf sat at the front, a tall man with a hard face and black eyes that gave away nothing. Beside him, a woman stumbled along on foot, a rope around her neck. Her hands were bound behind her. A thick wool blanket covered her from head to knee. She walked without looking up. The warriors stopped. The dust settled. The street filled with silence. The chief did not shout. He spoke low and clear, the kind of voice a man uses when he already knows the answer. "This woman has been with my people for 6 years," he said. "Now I am bringing her back. She is the daughter no man chose. I want her gone from my camp. One of you will marry her, by sundown, or Tucson burns." The sheriff, a man named Tom Weston, looked at the woman, then at the warriors, then at the ground. Nobody spoke. The chief turned his horse. He pulled the rope, and the woman stumbled after him across the street to a wooden post outside the general store. He tied the rope to the post, short enough that she could not sit. She stood there, head down, the blanket hiding everything but the shape of her shoulders and the bare soles of her feet on the hot wood. The warriors fanned out. Still no one moved. A farmer named Henry Whitfield watched from the feed store. He had a wife and 2 daughters. He looked at the woman tied like an animal and thought about stepping forward. Then he saw the warriors' rifles. He stayed where he was. The clock in the church tower struck 10. The heat deepened. The woman's feet shifted. The blanket must have been suffocating. No one brought her water. Mayor Alden stood on the hotel steps. He did not look at her. He looked at the warriors and then at the sheriff. "We can't fight them," he said quietly. "You know that." Sheriff Weston didn't answer. An hour passed, then 2. The woman's head drooped lower. One of the warriors laughed at something. The sun climbed and the shadows shortened, and the men of Tucson did nothing. At 3 o'clock, a narrow figure limped out of the church. It was Father Cain, an old priest with a wooden leg. He carried a tin cup of water and walked toward the post. A warrior moved to block him. The chief raised a hand. The warrior stopped. The priest set the cup at the woman's feet. He didn't try to untie her. He just looked at her for a long moment, then limped back into the church. The water sat untouched. The woman did not move. By late afternoon, the crowd had thinned. Men went back to their stores. Women drew curtains. The street grew quiet. The woman was still there. The rope had not loosened. The ultimatum hung over the town like smoke before a fire. And still, no man stepped forward. The dust on the eastern road shifted again, but this time there were no warriors, just a single rider coming slow. A dark brown horse, a light beige hat, a bright red bandana around the rider's neck. He did not look like a man in a hurry. He looked like a man who had seen a great deal, and he was riding straight toward the post. The afternoon sun caught the lever-action rifle in his saddle scabbard. His eyes swept the street. He saw the warriors. He saw the sheriff doing nothing, and he saw the woman tied to the post, the blanket stiff with dust, the cup of water still full at her feet. He did not look away. The stranger held his horse still for a long moment. His eyes moved across the street. He counted the warriors. He saw the rifles. He saw the blank faces of the townsmen and the sheriff standing with his thumbs hooked in his belt, doing nothing. The woman had not moved. He dismounted slow. He tied the horse to a rail outside a feed store and walked toward the porch where the old shopkeeper still stood. The man's broom was against the wall. His hands were shaking. The stranger didn't introduce himself. He just said, "Tell me what happened." The shopkeeper looked at the warriors and then back at the stranger. He licked his lips. He spoke in a low voice. "This morning, Chief Grey Wolf rode in with that woman. She's been with them 6 years, he said. Now he don't want her. Called her the daughter no man chose. He tied her to that post and told the whole town a man has to step up and marry her by sundown. If nobody does, he burns Tucson." The stranger's jaw didn't move. He kept looking at the woman. The blanket was dusty. The rope around her wrists had rubbed the skin raw. "Has anyone tried to help her?" The shopkeeper let out a breath. "A priest brought her water. Chief let him do it. But later one of the warriors kicked the cup away, just to show us. Then a farmer named Whitfield asked if he could loosen the rope. The chief said if he touched her, he'd lose a hand. Whitfield backed off. Nobody's gone near her since." The stranger looked at the warriors again. Chief Grey Wolf sat on his horse at the far end of the street. He was watching now. He had seen the stranger ride in. "What did the sheriff do?" the stranger asked. "Nothing. Same as all of us. We can't fight 20 Apaches. You see what they got. We got farmers and a few old rifles. The sheriff said if we just wait, maybe the chief will leave when the sun goes down. But I don't believe that." The stranger didn't answer. He stepped off the porch and walked a few paces closer to the post. He stopped before the warriors could block his path. He stood in the middle of the street, dust on his boots, and he looked at the woman from about 20 feet away. The blanket covered her completely. He couldn't see her face. But something about the shape of her shoulders made him pause. He didn't know why. The chief called out from his horse. His voice was flat. "You come to take the woman? You know the rule. Marry her and she leaves with you. But if you just came to interfere, the town pays for it." The stranger turned his head. He met the chief's eyes. He did not speak. He did not smile. He just looked. The chief waited. The warriors shifted in their saddles. The silence stretched thin. The shopkeeper watched from the porch. The sheriff watched from outside his office. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. The stranger finally turned his face back to the woman. He studied the rough blanket. He saw the way her shoulders rose and fell with shallow breaths. She was awake and aware. She had to be. He didn't walk toward her. Not yet. But he didn't walk away either. The sun was sinking lower. The light was turning gold. The shadows stretched long across the street. And the stranger stood in them like he had roots in the dirt. He hadn't planned on a fight today. But then again, he never did. The stranger did not shift his weight. He did not look at the sheriff. He watched the woman. The blanket was dusty and stiff. The rope cut a dark line into the wood post. He could see a thin trail of dried blood running from her wrist down to the knuckle. The cup of water lay on its side now. Empty. Not from drinking. Someone had kicked it. He glanced at the warriors. They were spread out in a loose half-circle. Each one held a rifle. They were relaxed. They knew no one in this town would fight. This was sport to them. The chief was still watching the stranger with flat black eyes. He had not moved from his horse. The old shopkeeper was still on the porch. His broom was still against the wall. He looked like a man who had seen something terrible and could not look away. The stranger did not speak to him again. There was nothing left to ask. The light slipped from gold to orange. The shadows on the street grew long and sharp. The church bell rang 5 times. 1 hour left. The stranger took a step. He did not walk toward the woman. He walked to the middle of the street. He stopped where the dust was thickest. He turned his back on the warriors and faced the town. He looked at the men on the boardwalk. He looked at the sheriff. He looked at the windows where faces flickered behind curtains. He did not raise his voice. 60 men in this town, he said, and not one of you can find the guts to walk 20 feet and untie a woman. The sheriff opened his mouth and then closed it. A man in a black coat stepped off the hotel porch and put his hands in his pockets. That was all. Nobody answered. The stranger stood there for a long count. Then he turned around again and faced the chief. The chief smiled. It was a slow smile. It did not reach his eyes. "You talk like a man who wants to die," the chief said. The stranger did not answer that either. He walked to the water trough near the feed store. He pulled a clean rag from his saddlebag. He soaked it in the trough. Then he walked straight toward the post. The warriors tensed. The chief raised a hand. They did not move. The stranger knelt in front of the woman. He did not lift the blanket. He set the wet rag on the ground near her feet. Then he looked up at the blanket where her face would be. He said nothing. He just stayed there on one knee. The rag soaked into the dust. A sound came from under the blanket. It was small. It might have been a breath. It might have been a word. The stranger's hand stopped in midair. Something in that sound hit him like a stone between the eyes. He did not know why. He stayed like that, frozen, for 3 heartbeats. Then he stood up. He left the rag on the ground. He backed away from the post and stood again in the middle of the street. His face was unreadable, but his hands were not steady. The sun pressed down toward the rooftops. The shadow of the church stretched across the whole street. The temperature dropped. Still no man moved. The stranger stood there with the dust on his boots and the last light on his face. He was not going anywhere. The town knew it. The chief knew it. And the woman under the blanket, she did not know it yet. But she would. The stranger's hands had stopped shaking. The sound from under the blanket still sat in his chest like a stone. But he was not going to wait anymore. He walked toward the post. The last light was bleeding out of the sky. The street was purple and gray. The church bell had gone silent. The whole town was holding its breath. He heard his own boots on the dirt. He heard nothing else. Chief Grey Wolf watched from his horse. The warriors still fanned out behind him. No one lifted a rifle. Not yet. The stranger stopped in front of the woman. He stood close enough to smell the dust in the wool blanket. He could see how the rope had worked its way into her wrists. The skin was torn in 2 places. The blood had dried black. He knelt. The crowd shifted on the boardwalk. The sheriff took half a step forward and then stopped. The old shopkeeper grabbed the porch rail with both hands. The stranger reached out. He took the edge of the blanket between his fingers. It was coarse and hot, as if it had been baking in the sun for hours. He lifted it slow. First he saw her chin. It was thin. Her lips were cracked, and there was a cut at the corner. Then he saw her cheek, and then he saw the scar. It started below her jaw on the right side, and ran down her neck and disappeared under the collar of the rough dress she wore. The skin was pulled tight and shiny. It was the kind of scar a person carries after a bad burn, the kind made by fire and not by blade. The stranger went pale. His face lost all expression, like someone had wiped it clean. His hand stayed on the blanket. His eyes locked on that scar. He did not blink. He knew that scar. He had seen it happen. He had pulled her out of the burning house 6 years ago on a ranch outside Laramie. He had held her while she screamed with her hair on fire. He had bandaged that scar himself the night before the Apaches came. He had buried an empty coffin for her. His mouth moved. The name came out as a whisper. Lydia. The woman's head lifted a little. Under the blanket, her eyes had been closed. Now they opened. They were dull. They tried to focus. Lydia Langford, he said again, softer, like a prayer. She blinked. The name seemed to fit somewhere deep inside her. Something moved behind her eyes. Then she turned her head just enough to see his face. And she knew him. Her lips parted. No sound came out. A tear broke through the dust on her cheek. It made a clean line all the way down to her chin. The stranger did not wipe it away. He just looked at her. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet, but his face was stone. He stood up. He let the blanket fall back over her shoulders. He turned around to face the chief. Chief Grey Wolf's smile had faded. He was studying the stranger now the way a man studies a loose board on a bridge. The stranger walked forward until he was 10 feet from the chief's horse. He looked up at the warrior. His voice was quiet and flat. "I will marry her." The chief did not answer right away. He looked at the woman, then at the stranger, then at the warriors. "You do not know what you are taking," the chief said. "She is cursed. She is the daughter no man chose. Even my people would not keep her. I said I will marry her." The chief's black eyes narrowed. He leaned forward on the pommel of his saddle. "And if I say no? Then you will have a problem." The words landed like a stone in a shallow pond. The townsmen on the boardwalk stopped breathing. The sheriff's hand moved to his gun belt and then fell away again. The chief's mouth twisted. It was not a smile. It was the look of a man who has just understood something important about his enemy. He said something in Apache to the warriors. 4 of them dismounted. They spread out in a half circle around the stranger. Their rifles were not drawn yet, but their hands were on them. The chief looked down at the stranger. "You are alone," he said. "This town will not help you. That woman cannot help you. You have nothing but your mouth." The stranger did not look at the warriors. He did not look at the woman. He kept his eyes on the chief. "I have enough." The chief watched him for a long moment. Then he lifted his hand. The 4 warriors pulled their rifles free. The sound of the metal on leather was the only sound in the whole town. And the stranger did not move. The 4 warriors tightened the half circle. Their rifles were up, though none were pointed directly at his chest. Not yet. Chief Grey Wolf slid from his horse, landing soft as a cat on the dust. He walked up until he was close enough to smell the stranger's sweat and the leather of his gun belt. He looked at the stranger's face for a long time. Then he laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You have a dead woman's name in your mouth," the chief said. "This woman has not spoken in 2 years. She is a ghost. You want a ghost?" The stranger didn't answer. His hands hung at his sides. His rifle was still in its scabbard on the horse, 20 feet away. His pistol was holstered. He made no move toward it. The chief stepped back. He called out to his warriors in Apache. They lowered their rifles. The tension on the street cracked, but did not break. "Take her," the chief said. "Marry her. But you leave at dawn. Both of you. You go east. I will not see you again. If you stay past sunrise, I will kill you, and I will burn this town, and I will bury her in the ashes." The sheriff let out a breath. A farmer named Whitfield put his hands on his knees, like he might be sick. The old shopkeeper turned away and walked inside his store. The town was relieved. You could see it in the way shoulders dropped and doors began to open. They had their answer. The stranger would take the burden. Tucson would not burn. That was all they had needed to know. The stranger didn't look at them. He didn't thank them. He walked back to the post. The warriors parted to let him through. He untied the rope from the post first. He loosened the knot at her wrists, slow, careful. The rope fell away. For a long moment her arms just hung there. Then she moved them in front of her body. The skin was raw and bleeding fresh where the rope had been. She didn't cry out. He lifted the blanket away from her face again. This time, he pulled it back over her hair and let it fall around her shoulders instead of covering her. The scar was visible. So was the thinness of her neck, the hollows under her eyes. Her hair was dull brown and cut short. She looked at him, and something flickered in her gaze. Not recognition, not yet, but the beginning of it, like a door opening a crack in a dark room. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded. He gave her his arm. She took it with both hands. He led her past the warriors, past the chief's unmoving stare, past the sheriff who was looking at his boots. He walked her to the feed store where the old shopkeeper had been. He opened the door and called inside. The shopkeeper came forward, pale and afraid. "I need a clean blanket, water, and a room for the night. A barn will do." The shopkeeper nodded. He fetched a wool blanket, darker than the last but clean. He brought a bucket of water and a tin cup. He led them behind the store to a low wooden barn where hay bales were stacked. There was a stall with fresh straw. He left them there. The stranger helped Marguerite sit on a bale. He wet a rag and cleaned her wrists. He wrapped them in strips torn from his own shirt. He gave her the cup. She drank slow, eyes closed. Then she opened them and looked at him. Her voice came out as a rough whisper. "You came back." He didn't answer. He just sat on the straw next to her and stayed there until she fell asleep. Night came down hard. The town went quiet. The church bell rang 10, then 11. The stranger did not sleep. He sat with his back against the barn wall, rifle across his knees. He heard the horses before he saw them. 3 sets of hooves moving careful, not fast. They stopped 30 yards out. He blew out the candle inside the barn. He moved Marguerite deeper into the stall, behind a pile of hay bales. He whispered to her to stay still. She opened her eyes, but she didn't make a sound. He went to the door. He cracked it open. 3 Apaches were dismounting. They carried no torches. They carried knives, and one had a war club. They were coming to kill him. He let the first one reach the door. He waited until the man's hand touched the wood. Then he swung the rifle barrel hard into the man's face. The Apache dropped without a sound. The second one lunged through the door. The stranger met him with the stock to his gut, then his knee. The third one ran around the side of the barn. The stranger followed, tackled him, and pinned him to the ground. He dragged the wounded warrior inside. He tied him to a post. He lit the candle again. He spoke low in English, then a few words of Apache he'd learned a long time ago. "What is the chief's plan?" The warrior spat. But the stranger was patient. He didn't hit him. He just waited. Finally the man spoke, his voice full of hate. "The chief will never let you leave. He will kill you in the morning when you come out. Then he will burn the town anyway. The woman was always the bait. She is nothing to him. She is a stick he uses to poke the ants." The stranger stood up. He looked at Marguerite behind the hay. She had heard every word. Her eyes were wide but dry. He went to her. He helped her up. He said nothing. But she looked at him, and this time there was no crack in the door. The door was open. "I know you will stop him," she said. The stranger picked up his rifle. The stranger picked up his rifle and looked at Marguerite. She had pulled the clean blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes followed him. She was calm now, not the calm of a person who feels safe, the calm of someone who had already been through the worst and knew there was nothing left to fear. He put a finger to his lips and moved to the barn door. Outside the night was still. The town slept. Somewhere a dog barked twice and then went quiet. He listened for a long count. No hooves, no warriors. The 2 men he'd wounded were gone. The one he'd tied was bound tight in the stall. He went back to Marguerite. "You heard him," he said. "The chief will not honor the deal. He will burn the town." She nodded. Her voice was still a rasp, but it held. "He always meant to burn it. The marriage was a game. He wanted to see the town choose a man and then kill him in front of everyone. After that, the town would be too broken to fight. It was never about me." The stranger didn't answer. He was watching the shadows outside the barn window. Then he saw it. A thin flicker of orange light, reflecting on the dust. Not the sun. It was still hours before dawn. He opened the barn door a crack. Down the street near the hotel, flames were eating the side of a building. The mayor's office. The fire was small but growing. No one was fighting it. Then a voice cut through the night. Chief Grey Wolf. He was standing in the middle of the street with a lit torch in his hand. His warriors flanked him on horseback. They had torches too. "You thought you could cheat me," the chief shouted. "You took the woman, but you did not take her far. And now my men did not return. So the town pays." The stranger pulled the door shut. He counted the warriors, 6 with torches. More behind them in the dark. He had a rifle and a pistol. Marguerite had nothing. A woman screamed from the hotel. The fire was spreading to the next building. The church bell began to ring, frantic and broken. Then a gunshot. A man cried out. Then another shot. The stranger moved to the back of the barn. There was a small window. He could see the alley behind. No one there. He helped Marguerite up. "Stay low. Head for the church. Father Cain will hide you if he can. Go now." She gripped his arm. "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." She didn't argue. She slipped through the window and vanished into the dark. The stranger loaded his rifle. He stepped out the front door and into the street. The fire had caught the hotel now. The roof was smoking. People were running with buckets, but the confusion was total. The chief saw the stranger and smiled. He pointed the torch at him. "There he is." The stranger walked forward. He stopped in the middle of the street, same place he'd stood hours ago. The light from the fire painted his face orange. He held the rifle low. "You wanted a man to marry her," the stranger said. "I gave you one. You sent men to kill me in the dark. They failed. Now you burn the town anyway. You are not a chief. You are a liar." The chief's smile vanished. "You have no name. You are nothing. I will take the woman again. I will tie her to that post and let the fire reach her. You will watch." The stranger raised his rifle. He put the barrel an inch from the torch in the chief's hand. The chief did not flinch. "Drop the torch," the stranger said. The chief laughed and threw the torch at the stranger's feet. It rolled, spitting sparks. The warriors behind him lifted their rifles. The stranger kicked the torch away, then swung the rifle butt into the chief's gut. The chief folded. The warriors fired. The shots went wild. The stranger dove behind a water trough, rifle already aimed. From the hotel porch, Sheriff Weston appeared with a shotgun. He fired at the warriors. One horse reared. 2 townsmen ran out with rifles. The fire was spreading, but now people were fighting back. The chief scrambled to his feet, knife drawn. The stranger stood up. He didn't fire. He just looked at the chief. "You lost tonight," the stranger said. "Leave now, or you'll lose more than your honor." The chief spat. But he saw the townsmen gathering, the sheriff reloading. He shouted an order. The warriors pulled back. They rode into the dark, leaving the fires behind. The stranger watched them go. Then he turned to help with the flames. But his mind was already on Marguerite. The dawn was coming, and the chief would return. The first gray light of dawn crept over the eastern hills. The fires were out, but the smell of wet ash hung heavy in the street. A few men still stood with buckets, faces black with soot. The sheriff sat on the hotel porch, cleaning his shotgun. The stranger walked through the mud and stopped in the middle of the road. He did not need to wait long. Hooves sounded from the far end of town. Warriors, at least a dozen, rode out of the shadows. Chief Grey Wolf led them. His face was hard, his eyes burning with a cold fury. He reined his horse 20 yards from the stranger. The warriors fanned out, rifles ready. The town came alive again. Doors creaked open. Faces appeared at windows. Father Kane stepped out of the church, holding the heavy wooden door part way open. Behind him, Marguerite stood wrapped in the clean blanket, her scarred face visible. She saw the stranger and did not look away. Chief Grey Wolf pointed with his rifle. "You are still here. Now the town burns, and you die first." The stranger did not raise his weapon. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Last night I caught one of your men. He told me everything. You never planned to let her go. You never planned to let this town live. The marriage was a lie. You wanted to see them choose a man, then kill him in front of everyone. After that, you would burn Tucson anyway." A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff stood up. Whitfield, the farmer, clutched his rifle tighter. The shopkeeper came out of his store. The chief's jaw tightened. "You have no proof. You are a liar." The stranger turned his head. The captured warrior, bruised but alive, stumbled out of the barn. His hands were tied. He stood in the street, head low. The stranger said, "Tell them." The warrior said nothing, but his silence was enough. The chief saw the eyes of his own men shift. The stranger looked back at the chief. "You are not a chief. You are a man who hides behind women and fire. Leave these lands, now. Take your warriors and never return. Do that and you walk away." Chief Grey Wolf's face twisted. He dropped his rifle. In one fluid motion, he drew a long knife from his belt and kicked his horse forward. The animal lunged. The stranger's rifle came up. The barrel was a blur of steel in the morning light. The chief was 10 feet away, then 5. The knife flashed. A single shot cracked the air. The chief's body jerked. The knife fell from his hand. The horse kept running for a few strides, then slowed. The chief slid from the saddle and hit the dirt. He did not move again. The warriors stood frozen. Their rifles were up, but their eyes were on the fallen chief. The stranger levered another round into the chamber. He pointed the rifle at the nearest warrior. "Go!" One by one, they turned their horses. They rode east, out of town, and did not look back. The stranger lowered his rifle. The street was silent except for the wind and the distant sound of a crying child. The sheriff stepped forward, his shotgun still in his hands. He looked at the body, then at the stranger. He seemed about to speak. He didn't. The stranger turned and walked toward the church. Marguerite was still standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame. He stopped in front of her. Her eyes were wet but steady. He said nothing. He just stood there in the street, the smoke still rising behind him, the man who had waited 6 years. The stranger did not lower his head. He stood before Marguerite, the rifle still in his hand. The sound of the shot had faded, but the street held it like a bell that would not stop ringing. He looked at her face. The scar. The hollows under her eyes. The way she was watching him, not with fear, but with something that had been locked away for a long time. He slipped the rifle into its scabbard on the horse. Then he walked to her. Father Kane stepped back into the church doorway. The old priest said nothing. He just made the sign of the cross and let them be. The stranger reached out and took her hand. It was cold and thin, but it closed around his. He didn't speak. He led her across the ash-streaked street to the horse. There, on the church steps, the clean blanket lay where she had dropped it. He bent down, picked it up, and shook the dust from it. He wrapped it around her shoulders and pulled it close at the front. She lifted her chin. For the first time, she did not hide her face. He helped her mount the horse. She moved like someone who had forgotten how to be lifted, but she did not resist. He climbed up behind her and took the reins. The horse shifted its weight. The street was silent. The sheriff stood near the dead chief, his shotgun resting against his leg. He looked at the stranger and opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He had no right to thank him. No one in that town did. The shopkeeper was still on his porch, clutching his broom like a man who had forgotten he was holding it. Henry Whitfield lowered his rifle. His wife stood in the doorway of their home, a hand over her mouth. Mayor Alden, from the hotel steps, looked at the stranger and then at the ground. The whole town had the same look, shame mixed with relief, the kind that you swallow like a stone. The stranger did not look at any of them. He turned the horse east. As they passed the barn, he caught sight of the captive warrior. The man's hands were still tied, but he was on his feet. The stranger paused. He nodded once to the sheriff, a silent instruction. The sheriff understood. He walked over and cut the rope. The warrior stumbled, then walked away without a word. He would not come back. The horse moved on. The morning sun broke over the hills and spilled gold across the desert. The heat was already starting to rise, but the air was clean. The town shrank behind them. Marguerite leaned her weight against the stranger's chest. She did not cry. She just let out a breath, long and deep, like someone surfacing from dark water. They rode without speaking for a mile, then 2 miles. The desert opened around them. The road ahead was empty. Finally she spoke. Her voice was a thin thread, but it held. Lydia is gone. I've been Marguerite for so long I don't remember the other girl. He did not answer right away. He just held the reins a little tighter. Then Marguerite it is, he said. She closed her eyes. The scar on her neck caught the light, but it did not seem so heavy now. He had found her, and that was enough. They rode until the town was a smudge of dust on the horizon. The road went on. The stranger did not look back. He had no name to leave behind. He had no need for thanks. He just had the sound of her breathing and the feel of the horse beneath them, and the knowledge that, after 6 years, they were finally heading in the same direction. The dust settled behind them, and the desert sealed over their tracks. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.